Hey guys, CW Tech here, and in today's video we're going to talk about the performance of the Dell Precision 5820 Tower Workstation. Let's get into it. In the previous video, I done a full teardown and kind of overall review of this machine, going through the ease of upgradability, kind of going over the specs. In this video, I've ran several benchmarks that I'd like to kind of go over and compare and contrast versus some models below it, some faster machines, some faster models, but just kind of really give you a good idea on the performance to expect out of this machine, maybe versus what you currently have versus maybe what you may want to upgrade to. So let's take a look at these stats now. So in this configuration, this machine came with a 10900X i9 CPU. Looking at the results, we can see this machine scored 31,642 in the Passmark CPU benchmark. On the screen, you can see the comparison between the 8700K, 9700K, the i9 11900K, the i9 12900K, and lastly the i9 13900K. You can see there's a huge differential in performance comparing these CPUs. You can see the 10900X holds up fairly well. Comparing the bottom two CPUs, the 8700K and the 9700K, these are i7s, to where the 11900K and onward are all i9s. Overall, I think this build is still very competent in, performing the general 3D render tasks that this machine's likely going to be kind of put through. Going on to the 3D rating, looking at the A2000, you can kind of see this is the entry-level RTX card. As you can see, this A2000 totally dominates the P series and below. You can see the P4000 was one of the flagships in the engineering and design workspace, but as you can see, this A2000 beats it pretty well. Scaling up towards the higher-end GPUs, the A4000, 6, and 5000, the A5000 actually beats out the A6000. I ran this test several different times and the results were fairly similar. The A5000 always beat it out. The main difference between the 5000 and the 6000 is 6000 just has additional RAM. Whenever we look at the RTX cards like the 3090 and the 4090, you can see it totally dominates the A series. But one thing to keep in mind, the RTX series, specifically the 3090, 4090, and even the 3070 Ti, stuff like that, none of those are ISV certified, which means if you're running these in a business environment with something like 3ds Max, Maya, SolidWorks, generally if you run into issues, the vendors will give a lot of pushback. So generally in the enterprise market, you don't really see these GPUs used very often. A lot of companies still use them without issue because they perform very well and they're very cheap in comparison to, the A4, 5, and 6000, but that's just one thing to keep in mind. Going over to the compute benchmarks, the results are fairly similar to where the A6000 totally dominates the A5000 this time. But again, comparing them to the RTX cards up top, there's really no comparison. But again, one thing to keep in mind, they're not certified for any like the Autodesk, SolidWorks, stuff like that. So if you run into issues, keep that in mind. Over on the SSD score, the Dell Class 40 NVMe comes in at 36,933. Whenever we took this machine apart, we found this was a standard SK Hynix drive. Comparing it to the 970, 980, 990 Pros, it holds its own. Definitely not the fastest SSD in the market, but generally with these machines, anytime you get to a Gen 3 SSD or newer, as you can see, this drive isn't going to win any awards in the speed category, but it does very well. Unless you're doing extreme I/O intensive processes and tasks on this, you're likely not going to really see that much of a difference. Going over to the V-Ray suite of products, we can see how the A2000 stacks up against the rest. Again, comparing the RTX cards up at the very top, there's not really any comparison. But again, as I've already said earlier, they're generally not certified with your software suite, so that is one thing to keep in mind. It is very interesting to see how much faster this A2000, pretty much the entry-level GPU, is against the P4000, P2200, and P2000 series of GPUs. Over on the V-Ray RTX benchmark, as you can see, this GPU is at the bottom. However, your program suite may not benefit from many of the ray tracing applications on this GPU. Overall, my thoughts on this build, it's interesting to see you're still getting a 10th Gen i9 in a brand new machine that's going to carry 5, 6, 7 year warranty if you opt to get that warranty. But it held its own, and for the price point, this machine was about $2,200 configured. So, you know, it's very, very fast for essentially what you're getting, especially if you're not doing anything too intensive on the GPU workspace. Think something like GIS mapping, very basic SolidWorks, AutoCAD vault work. You know, it isn't going to be winning any awards, but, you know, compare these results to your machine. Both Passmark and V-Ray, totally free. They don't cost a dime. So you can download these things, run them, compare your current setup with these results here and see if it makes sense to upgrade. That's always one of the things I like to do is if you're in the market to upgrade your machine, you're like, hey, is it really worth upgrading? Let's see the difference. Well, you can take this review, go straight to the website, check the results up in the corner, and you can kind of compare exactly what kind of build your machine has versus this, and check the comparisons out and see if it makes sense. If your machine is a third slower than this, hey, it may make sense to upgrade it. But if it's about the same machine, even though it may be 3 or 4 years old, maybe you hold on to your machine for a couple more years, or you maybe modify your budget and look and see what makes more sense for you. Wrapping up, I have no issues with this build. It's very easy to upgrade, very easy to get into. I/O is okay. I would prefer to have a little bit more I/O on the back and on the front, but what can you really expect on a, you know, on an OEM build? Dell's warranties are very good, so that's generally, I usually go with Dell or Lenovo on the engineering workspace side whenever I'm building an engineering or design workstation. This one's a very entry-level one though. I usually land at the 13th or the 12th series CPUs. You know, 64 gig is pretty much the very entry point to that. Usually it's 128. GPU-wise, if it is a very basic engineering task, A2000 is going to be fine. Depending on your monitors, depending on what software suite you're using. If we're talking about Autodesk Vault, A2000 is okay for the basic, you know, basic engineering workflow. If it is a power user or, you know, some of the high-end programmers or designers, I'm usually going up to like an RTX A4000, still saying the i7, i9. One thing to keep in mind, generally with the Autodesk, Maya, SolidWorks applications, they really benefit from that single core performance. So higher clock speed generally is king, but still you want to have enough cores and enough threads to kind of keep up with all your tasks. So I really like the 12th and the 13th gen CPUs. Again, i7, i9 is fine. The Xeon equivalents are great. You just have to weigh the pros and cons of the cost of going the Xeon route. I like to go the Xeon route for the higher end workstations too because you get ECC memory support. So for those super critical workloads, I like to go that route. But again, I use Passmark to kind of compare the results on if I'm looking for a Xeon. I always check those single threaded workloads to see which Xeon is comparable to like a 12700K or a 13700 or 13900K. So leverage all these benchmarking tools to kind of compare and contrast exactly where you're at, what you're looking for, and where you need to be. As always, please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you'd like to work with me. My contact info is in the bottom. And as always, please feel free to like and subscribe to this video. It really helps me out, really trying to build a pretty neat channel here. Have a great day.